Hello, everyone. Welcome to a special Thursday edition of API Review, where we are trying to get rid of all of these red things that say that people would like us to already be done with them. So, up first, let's resume the JSON source generation. So, 45488. Naomi.
Thanks. So on Tuesday, we went over the scenarios and goals for the source generation for its system text JSON project. So just quick recap there, just faster startup and lower locks on startup and faster throughput, reducing the size of applications where possible, and removing IO linker warnings where possible. So today I just want to go over the APIs that developers would interact with as they try to use the source generator. So a few scenarios here. Discussing the case where developers are using system text JSON directly. We start with the new pattern I'm proposing, which is new overloads accepting the generated metadata. So you specify the type for generation with the attribute, and then you call a property on an instance of the generated context to pass the metadata for that type specifically for serialization and deserialization. So the first one here is I know that code was generated for all types, and I know which specific type I'm processing, so you can generate the metadata for the type. The next one is the case where you've generated metadata for all the serializable types, but you don't know which type you're passing. Say you get the type from some method that returns a type needed for deserialization. In that case, you would pass the whole context to the serializer. Then moving on, if we so the existing pattern, so we shipped the system text JSON with the serializer 2 releases ago. So a lot of folks have used it since then. So how does this work for them? So assuming custom options, we provide a new API on JSON serializer options called SetContext, which accepts an a generic parameter for a type that derives from JSON serializer context. And the generic constraint here is that it obviously derives from the context and also has a public parameters constructor. And the public parameters constructor is meant to create an instance of that context which isn't bound to JSON serializer options. So we have the idea of binding a context on options. So at the point where you're setting the context, both the context and options should not be bound at that point.
Can I ask a question, Lemmy?
Yeah.
So just to make sure I understand. So basically, you have existing code that's using JSON serializer and passing around options to use in all of your method calls. And in one place, I can say, hey, options, here's the generated source that you should know about. And then any other uses will make use of it. That's correct?
That's correct.
What happens if presumably I could end up in a situation where I actually have multiple of these from different assemblies, each contributing their own JSON context. How does that play with the unbound aspect of this?
So in this, I am not yet proposing a case where you can sort of do a union of context from different places. You would have to sort of partition your serialization logic to understand where metadata comes from and when you can use it to serialize what type. Later on, I discussed like the concept of a global static where you can populate unbound context and possibly do a clone with, or if some like a clone of fork action that takes an options, and then create an instance, and then perhaps we can create like utility methods that do some sort of merge. That would basically, I think the most relevant method for something like that would be to get the type info for a type, so you could look through all the type info, like the context instances you have and see whether any one of them have the type metadata data for a class. It's a little bit tricky to have that sort of global static or global registration because it's global, and then multiple folks can be trying to add context that provide metadata for a certain type, and it's a question of like which one would you pick, which one should you honor. You might assume that all of the metadata would be the same, but that is not correct, because across different assemblies, a type might have internal members that are not visible from another assembly. So there might be cases, however cornered they might be, where the fact that it's not clear what order to use might mess something up. So, I mean, I had some discussions with some folks here and there on the ASP.NET team. They don't like that concept of like a global static where you register stuff and try to. I mean, I don't think that they have lots of those.
Yeah.
I don't know what the guidance is around things like that, but it is possible, but it will be tricky. Is what I would say.
That's all fine. I was more wondering about, in the context of API review, this being called SetContext. I'm wondering, like, what would go wrong if we called it add context, and support, like, is there a concern about being able to call then add context multiple times? Like, what goes wrong in that case?
In that case, since the options are local and you're setting them in an order, perhaps we could say you specified your order, and then we can then like pick some sort of heuristic to say whether last one wins or first one wins when we're searching through for metadata for a type. As long as it's local, so how it was composed, then I think it's fine. I think my comments earlier were more about the global registration. But a local one, I think that sounds. I haven't thought about it much, so I don't want to overcommit.
Okay, that's fine. I would just, it's something to consider as we're going through. Like, even if we currently would throw an exception if you called it the second time, like making it be able to support that if we thought that it was a path we wanted to go, that might impact the naming.
Yeah, it would be. Yeah, in that case, it would be add context. It seems like we would have to make some sort of decision about that now, or maybe just go with this for now and then come back to it later on, I would say. But yeah.
We can keep going, just something to note.
Okay.
Sorry, just last question on that. Do we believe, based on the scenarios that you're aware of, we believe that set once and only one is like the 90% case?
I would say like a lot, like it's hard to come up with a number, but I would say like at least for like ASP.NET cases, like things we know of concretely, yes, like the proposal satisfies those. But I would say more than if a couple people have mentioned, like if I want to take the metadata from multiple places, how would I do it?
One quick thought I had there was if you derive your own context, that's the aggregate of however many things you want to aggregate, and then set that. Was the one thought that I had. If you wanted to do multiple, you would make your aggregate context that did all the multiple ones.
I mean, you kind of want a way to compose them, though, right? Because I mean, I think the fundamental problem with this JSON context is that it's an internal type, right? So that means, my library, the example that I gave in Leomi was Cosmos DB, right? Cosmos DB has internal types that they use to serialize, as part of the protocol with their backend. And they also accept user types, and the user types are part of the payload that's sent to the server, right? So now the thing is, the user has a JSON context that they can give Cosmos, but Cosmos also has a JSON context for their own internal types. So they want to basically have, a message type that is internal to Cosmos that has an object property. And the only way they can serialize that if they can construct a JSON context that comprises both their types as well as the user's types. And so, I mean, I think aggregate, deriving from that might be heavyweight, but we could totally, have a method on JSON context called merge or something where you provide them in order, and then you get a new JSON context that kind of walks them in order or something, right? And this way you can compose them.
I mean, nothing in the current design stops you from doing that. They, even if there's not a generator option to make the class be public, you could somewhere expose a public JSON serializer context, or whatever the base class is called, that is just your default context, and then you could make a custom context because it's a public type that's not sealed, and walk the order of that you want to walk through the resolvers for GetType. I think it's possible right now. It's just not trivial. I mean, it actually is trivial because it's just trivia, but it's not a one-liner. It's like a 7-liner.
Yeah. The add context approach would appear to work. There's also the possibility of like an API to stitch them together. If I can come back with that later, I think that'll be fine. But it doesn't seem like too much work to go from here to then, and like in the next preview, I'd say.
So one thing that I may have missed is like, well, what is the reason why we put the JSON context on the options? Because the JSON context also has the options, right? So there already is a kind of one-to-one relationship.
Yeah, the reason to do this is to help existing code like work in cases where people don't want to change their code. That was one of the feedback items from Tuesday, where
the idea is that we already have APIs that accept JSON options. So if we can put the context in the options, we don't have to add overloads that take both, right?
So what was the last thing about taking both?
So I'm saying, like, by being able to put the JSON context in the options, basically it means people don't have to change their code because they already pass around JSON options and they can just snag in the JSON context at the root, and then everything else just works.
Yeah, that's correct. Just the thing to note there is it doesn't come with the like linker trimming, because that overload for backward compat will have the reflection code in there, so a fallback. So if the type doesn't exist, I guess the one benefit is if your context doesn't contain the type, then the serializer will generate it for you. So maybe we don't need the merging stuff, if that's fine, depending on the characteristics. But ASP.NET at a higher level might decide, because today they're limited to this pattern where you register the generated stuff on the context, because it's difficult for them to tease apart their code to have separate code paths where they can link out existing calls to the serializer that does reflection. But yeah, the thing just to say here that it doesn't have the able to trim out code, but yeah, the purpose of this is to let existing code work.
So, question: why is it set context of like T context? Don't you just pass in the instance?
So the generic constraint here is that it's a parameterless constructor, and that's when you new up one of the JSON contexts, it doesn't set an options. So like earlier iteration of this I had was, you just pass the new JSON context, but I got some good feedback, where to sort of stop users from having to reason about what kind of how do I instantiate the context. So this way we do it for you, just because we have a generic constraint, we just new up the T context and have it that way. So it's more of a convenience thing and less of a concept for people to know how to, because if you set one of these that you instantiated with an option, we'll throw an invalid operation exception saying the context was already bound. But this way you don't have to think about that.
Isn't there some sort of singleton hanging off of JSON context? I thought I saw that last time.
Yeah. Default thing.
Yeah, but that binds it to the default options of JSON serializer. So it's just like, do you want to use the default JSON serializer options? So it's different from this.
That's why I suggested the generic, so that you didn't pass default and then get an exception that says you need one that didn't already have its option specified.
So question.
Thanks, Jeremy.
This class, okay, so I designed some types to be serialized by JSON. It gens me a static class that I call SetContext on, right?
No, it doesn't gen you a static class.
It gens you what?
It gens you a regular class that you can instantiate.
I see. So I passed the T in here, like my derived JSON context.
Yeah.
And then, okay, got it.
Yeah, it's always with JSON context because that's what we name, and we don't have we don't provide a way for you to rename it for now. But if we did, then yeah, whatever your name is.
Hold on. I see. It's always called JSON context. You mean?
It's always called JSON
I
context.
see. Got it.
But yeah, for like with the public API, I think right now somebody could write this merged context that I just whipped up in Notepad, so it probably won't compile. But like, because all you have to do is defer the call to GetType info and the other now GetType info. So and pick an options, I guess. But like it seems solvable that somebody could build this if assemblies made a public JSON serializer context somewhere. So everybody would have to participate, of course, but I think it is doable right now. Anyway.
Yeah, the just can't be bound, I think, the instances. Okay, so yeah, existing pattern. I don't know what type then. So this is, I know the type, so you pass the options, and then I don't know the type, you still pass the options, and you pass the type. Like the exact usage of the serializer today. So moving on to using SystemText existing directly. So ASP.NET Core is like an example. So in the case of Blazor, this is what the code will be. You specify the type you want to perform serialization and deserialization on. You instantiate an options, like a context with an options, and you pass that to a new proposed API.
Static.
Or however you want.
Oh my god, static. I know it's fine. It's fine.
It's your calling code. You can do whatever you want, David.
Exactly. I know. Horrible things like this.
Okay, so
that's code that we expected in every Blazor page now, basically.
Yeah, I think
my guess is that people will add it to the DI and this inject it.
Sure, that still means you have to like write that inject and basically have an inject property, wire it up, and so the thing is you will forget it, but stuff will work, but it will just fall back to reflection, right? So like it's
The issue is the HTTP client like get from JSON async is an extension, and there's no way for us to kind of like sneak it in here currently.
I mean, it almost seems like for ASP.NET, you don't want to do this on a per page boundary. I think
no, you don't.
In the startup where you just export it once for everybody to use and then call it good.
Yep.
Right. Well, from I think Naomi's next thing is really ASP.NET, etc. Like they can still get it from the current thing by changing the options to be a bound options with the add or set or whatever context. The new API here is just if you need the trimmed version to avoid calling through the current API that is capable of doing reflection.
Well, two things. So like the first one is like how Blazor works today, and there's no real workaround because that method get from JSON async I believe is on HTTP client.
It is.
So and there's no injecting other context that doesn't get passed in directly. So even if we use DI, it wouldn't help as Emo said, because you have to inject it into every single class. But that is an issue we have today, even with options. So that needs to be solved in a different way.
Okay. Yeah. So next point. So MVC, the ASP.NET services can allow users to specify it this way. You don't get the linker benefits for today, but a couple of options include providing an API that allows the user to return a JSON context instance, and then I think there's more underlying work that needs to be done to like refactor the code such that the calls to the serializer are trimmed out, the ones that will root the reflection code. All right, moving on. So other libraries have the option to basically expose APIs that either take the options or context, and anything else if it's like not really possible. We discussed like global statics. We discussed merging option. Well, I don't know whether merging options from a global static, I guess, would be the way to go, but I guess that's not really a direction I'd like to like start working on unless it's like there's a concrete scenario that needs to be solved for. Okay, API proposal. Unless there are any questions. Okay,
what you
so
just covered was basically the side where I call a REST API, right? But like I think the more common case in ASP.NET would be you write effectively a web API where you just write a method that returns an IEnable of customer, and then
Yep.
ASP.NET transitively, transparently serializes those types on your behalf, right? And that one you can totally solve with a API that you call in the startup method, right? Because that's kind of the user has to kind of pass their JSON context to ASP.NET so ASP.NET can serialize on your behalf, right?
Yep, that's right.
Because in your case, you kind of call the method directly that does the deserialize, right? So that the user is still in control. But in the more common case, the user is not in control of how serialization happens or when it happens.
That's right. Yep. The one thing that isn't API, but that bugs me is that you have to list all the generic kind of instantiations, like list of blah, array of blah, to serialize those types too. That will definitely trip people up in preview 4, but it's fine. We'll figure it out later. So
are you saying that if I have a list of customer, I have to put an assembly level attribute that says serialize, like I need to serialize this thing as list of customer?
yes, specifically. Yep.
I guess the question is,
I missed it. That seems like a bit of failure indeed, yeah.
yeah, for cases like that where we can figure out what type needs to be passed, then like eventually want to get to the point where we scan for the T's and just not right now.
Oh, I guess that's
Scan what for the T's?
Scan the input code, the assembly we're compiling to see what T's are being passed. If it's discernible, like, if it's like a direct call to deserialize, then it's easy. If it's a generic, like nested in a bunch of generics, then I haven't tried it. It might be harder. And you might still need the attributes for cases like that, but at least maybe it's more easy to understand why you had to put the attributes yourself.
But that's only for if the root is list of customer, right? If I have if I say serialize me an order type, and the order type happens to have a property list of order item or something, then if I
you don't need to
serialize
specify.
the order, that already works because it transitively works the type of order, right? It's only when I say call this REST APIs and deserialize this whole thing as a list of weather forecast result, then I have to declare this as a list of, because that's basically the root that you do serializing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's whatever you pass
that's
as.
probably okay. That's less bad than I thought it would be.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing is like anything that can be like serialized polymorphically, meaning the instance. Like say you have an object array and the things you have in there like int and string, you need to specify those because there's no way the metadata for those will live. Okay, so just first thing, JSON serialize options, adding this method, SetContext. Maybe later it makes it makes sense to change it to add context, but for now SetContext where.
I have one more question. So like on this, so if we say that serializer options basically have the context, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we say this is the solution to the problem that people have to pass the context around. Then you also said like it's still not linker friendly, right? So every single API that today only takes the options, or I should say that doesn't take the context, wouldn't be linker friendly because it would have to have a fallback to reflection, right?
Yeah.
Does that mean that the problem still exists, that Steven was raising last time? If I build my iOS app, and unless I change all my call signs, I get flagged everywhere that I'm causing non-linker friendly APIs?
Yes, no, that problem is not solved. That problem still exists. It's just this is just a convenience.
Yeah, I don't think we could solve that problem,
A thing we didn't fully go into last time was for Xamarin and for Blazor WASM, the linker warnings aren't going to be on by default because all we trim by default in those cases is the BCL assemblies. And so like if we turned them on in 6, everybody would get a ton of warnings. and it would be a lot of noise as well.
Is the expectation that because we only trim the BCO and it's all about what statically is referenced by the user, you can't really get into a situation easily where we have missing metadata?
I think we can. We just think it's going to be really rare. That's what I heard. Eric and I had a conversation with some other folks after the meeting yesterday, and basically I raised these concerns, and I was told, yeah, they're valid concerns, but they're so rare, don't worry about it.
I think if that's the case, I could live with that, because we could just say, look, if you want to trim user code, then yeah, you're signing up for tweaking your code more aggressively, because, well, now you have to make sure that stuff is actually self-correct. In that case, yeah, if you now call APIs that will have a reflection fallback, you probably want a warning for those, right? So I think that's probably fair.
Yeah, I think we would still annotate the current serialize and deserialize methods to be the unreferenced code attribute or whatever. But it wouldn't be hyper viral because it will stop at the first assembly boundary, if I understood Eric's interpretation of, or statement of the universe.
You'll get a warning. When warnings are on and you call the existing serialize method, you'll get a warning then at that call site. And what we would tell people is, if you care about those warnings and you want to fully trim your app, call the other overload that takes in the context that doesn't have the fallback. That one is 100% trim safe.
And income warnings are for everything that I'm building and everything that I restored from you guys, as you look into the IL, right?
So today it's everything. They have plans to change that. If you don't have the source code for a place, like say there's warnings in a referenced assembly, they're going to collapse them all into one warning saying, hey, you're referencing Joe Schmo's NuGet packet, it's not linker friendly.
Yeah, I was thinking of, like, you use Cosmos DB, right? Cosmos DB calls the existing JSON options overloads and doesn't pass in the context. Then my app would get warnings because Cosmos is calling that, and I can't fix anything. And I just
if you were
decide not to depend on Cosmos.
Right, if you were trimming and you had warnings on in your app, you'll get one warning from Cosmos DB saying Cosmos DB is calling things that aren't linker friendly. So David has a comment in the chat. We had this discussion about, Laomi and I had this discussion about adding a feature switch that would take out the reflection. So when you turn this thing on, it would take out that reflection call. The issue with that is the user experience kind of stinks, in my opinion, because I'm going along, I have that flag turned on and everything works, and then I go use Cosmos DB, and then Cosmos DB breaks at runtime, right? Because it's like, oh, I can't find metadata for foo type. And now what? Now you have to turn that flag off, and now your stuff gets bigger. And then you don't use Cosmos DB anymore, but you still have that flag on, so it doesn't get trimmed. So I don't really like the user experience of adding a feature switch to pull the reflection out.
I see.
You're basically saying, Eric, that the feature switch would end up being global for the whole app / process, even though it may only be relevant to your portion of stuff. Is that right?
It would be global, yes. The globalness would be take out the reflection, the ref emit fallback stuff out of SystemText JSON.
Right. That's what I'm saying. You're saying the concern is that you might be doing that even though somebody else in your app needs
it. Right. You'd be doing it, turning on the flag to take it out, but somebody else might need it, like a referenced assembly might need it.
Right.
Like we couldn't turn that on by default in, like, say, Blazor WASM or Xamarin. I don't think.
Yes, basically the fact that you referenced Cosmos and got the warning, and then you turn on the flag because you want the trimming benefits, what that said is you now want to just break Cosmos, at which point you should have just not referenced it. So the flag is self-defeating?
Not necessarily, right?
Yeah, yeah, I think it would depends. There might be cases where it's safe and not. I think David and I discussed yesterday possibility of ASP.NET offering that as a option for their users at their level.
Right.
So it could, yeah, just not at system text JSON level, I don't think. But
Interesting, because that does have the same problem that Eric mentioned, but I don't know of a way around it if we basically are so far away from the call site without basically saying like, you can either give us a context or an options, and we'll call a different overload based on what was set. That may work.
I mean, that's the whole idea. Is if you have two different paths, don't choke them on one method, right? It's like have two different methods that take the two different paths, and then the linker can at least trim the path that's not used.
But it isn't
Right.
per call site. It's global. Like we have one component in the system that will serialize stuff, and that has to know for all types in this app what to pass, context or options.
Right. I mean, we would want everybody to pass context everywhere, I think.
Yeah.
I know there's existing places, like those places are going to have to get migrated if they want to be trim friendly.
So, David, was your suggestion then that the feature flag in ASP.NET would, pound if out the code that calls the current options overload?
Basically,
Okay.
like trim the reflection code, even though we're using it in a library, in case the user knows that their code is safe. But I guess it's unsafe because like if you call anything else in the process, it might barf. But I don't know.
Right, but that would at least let ASP.NET not then always keep the reflection one
Right.
bound,
Exactly.
because
Yep.
the late association with data where you have the runtime if is where
Yeah.
the linker can't help. So
But then what's the benefit of calling the overloads that take context not options? Because if you can use either one of them, then I don't understand what the benefit is of smuggling the context with the options or the other way around.
if you're the application and you're doing direct calls, then if you never called the one that took options, then the linker will trim it out. It's only when you're an ASP.NET application where something in the middle layer has this, if I found an ambient context, call the context one, otherwise look for an ambient options and call the options one, that the linker says, I can't prove you won't hit this else, so I can't delete the method, so the reflection code has to stay. Which is why it would be an ASP feature to get rid of that fallback path.
Yeah.
Can I get the context off the options?
today, I mean, I'm not proposing APIs for you to do that. What would you do with that?
You would do exactly what we just talked about with ASP.NET. If I can get the context off the options and somehow I just got an options, I can grab the context and pass it in, right?
Yes.
But they would still have the case of existing callers would have a null context, so you'll still have the runtime if.
Yep. But when if you have this feature switch, though, like that's an error case, right?
But that you could do the same thing right now if they. Okay, fair enough. There may need to be some magic to let the. We had an ASP call pattern, and I get to scroll. This to make this world work nicely. Yeah, we'd have to do some work to let ASP.NET get it. I won't say the words private reflection. You won't find them anywhere in the transcript of this stream.
You just said it. It's in the transcript.
So,
But why would it have to be? Could it be just the getter? Like, why would it binding off the setter?
I mean, to tell you the truth, I don't even like the proposed set context of T thing at all. Like, I think it should take a JSON serializer context instance, because like in Jeremy's case where he's like, well, I wanted to create my own and add things to it. How would I ever get it? Like, how would I ever get the instance to like add things to it with the current APIs proposed?
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, as I said, I had suggested to Laomi. He used to have it taking an instance, and I had suggested making it generic just so we could avoid the state where when you mate the two things together, the options can't already know about a context with the current implementation, and the context can't already know about an options because now you have potentially conflicting options. And so it was the if we think that the case is simply that somebody needs to specify the type, then great, make it a generic. You have the type safety, you have the reference to the thing, everything works, and you didn't get in the argument exception of I'm sorry, the context you gave me already knows about its options. This is now an invalid combination. Because every context needs an options, but it can't have an options if you're changing the relationship on them.
So pull the notepad over that you had before. How do I use merged context with this API?
You don't.
Right.
Unless you can come up with a default constructor that already knows about all the things that it wants to enumerate.
But I think, is that not the case here?
I mean, I could.
I mean-
like, if this would be the, I want to use, the, so you'd be like,
Yeah, and that's I don't.
this of new of JSON context default, and who are we saying? Cosmos?
Right. I would have assumed this is Cosmos's code, and they want to merge the user's context in with their context.
That's the only way that it works, yeah, because I don't think Cosmos wants to expose theirs.
Right,
Cosmos would have an API that accepts the user's context, and then they basically knew of a merged context that flows in their private or the internal Cosmos one and the SCE.
Yeah, I mean, right now with the case where it's, if you're only allowed one on the options, it's whoever touches the options last, because presumably setting the context seals the options just like calling serialize would. So whoever touches the context last needs to know about the entire universe. While add is throw on second call.
So,
Why
I
would
guess
it
my
seal
question. Sorry,
Why would it seal the options?
I was just guessing it would because of the way that everything ends up cloning everything. Laomi can tell me that I'm wrong.
Wait. You don't. Yeah. So the options need to be locked because we make decisions about like the metadata we're setting. Like what converter does it have?
On the first call to serialize or deserialize.
No, because you need to pass instances to the serializer. So unless we're doing a bunch of stuff lazily, it just complicates things. I'm to not have it frozen, because once it's frozen and like within the context, we know that we can set metadata appropriately. If it's not frozen, then we have to write a bunch of code to delay things until we know that the first serialization has happened. It's a little bit more complex code. So unless there's like a reason, like a really good reason to, and I've lost track of the like reasoning for you wanting to do that in this case.
You're saying I couldn't say new JSON serializer options dot set context some context dot naming policy equals whatever.
No,
I
you
did
need to
that
have set the naming policy like before setting the context.
That's weird. Sorry. I think
Well,
that's a weird
but what was the case where you wanted to set it afterward? Like,
I mean,
why not upfront?
Yeah, like in the case of this relationship, like it seems like it should be able to work. You basically just need to hold the delayed, like you need to just not instantiate the thing until the first serialize, and be like, oh, I have a pending call to go build a context. I can go build it and wrap myself in it or whatever. I think you could defer it without complicating things, but my understanding is once the JSON context, if you've called GetType info or read any of the properties off of it, it's already asked questions about the options it was associated with, which means they can't change now.
Yeah, that's the thing. So I guess you can delay it until you ask for the first property, but once you do, then it just makes the generation code a lot more tricky, and like the things we're passing to create metadata all have to be funcs to say, wait, don't do it until serialization has started. Which may be a good thing in some cases. Like I already have that today where we want to not eagerly, like when we're talking about the fast path, to not eagerly instantiate JSON property infos and things like that, since we don't need it. It just means that everything will have to be like that. And
Yeah, exactly. I think just remembering how your implementation you showed of the context and thinking of how the serializer works. If the call to add context just tells the options, when I seal myself, I need to go create a context, and it just basically sets a bit of I need to do that work, then you would end up not creating the context until after the serialization options were themselves already locked. So I think you can make that work without sealing the options too early.
yeah, I'll have to circle back and like I'll try it out.
Yeah. It's complicated, but I think it's doable without invalidating assumptions that Earhart had in his head of how things work.
So I have a more fundamental question. Like, who is actually using this set context? Because I mean, we said in the context of ASP.NET, I mean, no pun intended, but like in the context of ASP.NET, right? You either set it up in the I early where you say here's your JSON context that you will use, and that can use whatever mechanism we want. We don't have to use that context, right? We could just have whatever the services we want to use in ASP.NET, right? Similar to add JSON options, you could have .set JSON context, right? And then it's just the DI mechanism inside of ASP.NET. So who is actually the primary consumer of set context? Because basically my understanding is that we generally want user code and library code to stop just doing options, and we want them to instead take context so that they can differentiate between what is linker friendly and what isn't. So if we now tell everybody to just just stuff your JSON context into the options, it means we end up in a world where all the middlemen are still taking just JSON options, in which case nobody knows who's linker friendly, right? So this is actually a pattern we want to promote, or are we just saying, nope, you really want the secondary overload anyway?
Set context is to satisfy the case where you have existing code that doesn't want to change a lot, and you don't want to use our analyzer that we want to make later to help you change your code. So it's entirely about that, letting like the old code work.
So is it basically about the people that don't care about trimming, but that do want the other
they want the first startup, faster startup. So I mean, if it's not, it was feedback from last time. If it's not a priority, or I think the ASP.NET scenario, they'll just be forced to add an API that takes the context. If we don't have set context now.
Yeah.
And it'd be nice to have something to announce along with before to say like, hey, you can try out the source generator using this like upstream thing, maybe Houdini or something.
Yes, please. Yeah, we want something there by default. We can add an API. It's not the end of the world. I just want to make sure that we think that's the right thing to do. Like we'd have two top level options that are mutually exclusive.
Yeah. So if there's
But I think that's easier than the current design where you have two top level items. They both know about each other, and nobody can explain really who is constructed before whom and what is the actual thing you pass around. So I think if you and it sounds like conceptually, there is two different ways to do serialization, and it's viral, right? So like you either want JSON context all the way down, or you just say screw it, I don't care about that, and just pass an options all the way down. But like now we're saying, we kind of do both, and then you just inspect the options, but it has a context, and then that party decides to do this if statement. But I think that actually results in a more complicated design than the other one.
I see.
Because now, let's say I'm Cosmos. What am I expected to do? Do I continue to take JSON options? Do I take both JSON options and JSON context? Or do I only take JSON context because it has an option, right? Because both have the other, right? So it's not clear what we want people to do, right? But just looking at the types, right?
Yeah. I'd say we want people to use the context overloads because it has the best benefits, and the other stuff was for convenience. And
It
Well,
it feels like why wouldn't so besides the reflection fallback, if that was never there, wouldn't we just add context to options? Right? Is it just the fallback?
default. Yeah, it helps us avoid the fallback and know that we don't have to root code. I think that's the downside of any design that involves like it's inheriting from JSON serialized options. Unless we have JSON serializer context itself inherit from that, then we can add overloads for that specifically, and then hopefully like the type binding does the right thing, and then we know we go to the correct overloads. All of that to say is that it was all about the linker friendliness.
I see.
Even calling the serializer that takes the context instead of the type info, that's still rooting everything that you told the thing to generate, because it'll walk through the type waterfall or David's brilliantly evil array based on generic instantiations. Like, because all of that will seem to be reachable code. So it'll keep all of the types in. It'll keep all of their properties in. In fact, it probably would do that anyway, because I don't know that I guess the linker would know that no one ever called GetType info if you only ever called serialize with a type info. But
I mean, also, user code by default isn't trimmed, right? So if you like the source gen stuff,
this is
user code
in the like 30 years from now when enough stuff has happened that people can get full trim by default.
Yeah.
Uh,
yeah.
So context, like passing the context means you don't have reflection, but you're still rooted. Passing the type info means you've only rooted the things that you actually wrote the line of code talking about.
Yeah. And anything that's reachable from that type info, like all its properties.
Right, that's the one you really always want to use, is the JSON context dot my customer or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Split the two things then? That the senses?
So do we want SetContext still? The reason I added was feedback around existing things working, but is that something you want to accommodate, given the potential confusion? Like, when do we use what?
I mean, I think it's still valid. Like, there are multiple goals we're trying to attain here, one of which is around making your app smaller, but that's not the only goal. I also want faster startup. I also want sustained fast throughput, and using a compiler, compile time generated thing that helps me start up faster is valid, even if I'm not trimming my app. I feel like we should be able to attain that without having someone rewrite all their code.
Okay.
I just don't like this relationship between options and context, but I don't have a better idea of it.
Is it possible to leave it out for now and add in later in 6.0 if we get a decent amount of feedback on it?
I mean, the problem is, like, Steven's scenario is not very likely to get a lot of feedback, but I think it's valid, right? Just because yes, we try to make linking work, but, like, there's other benefits you get from that. And the question is, how do I get those without changing the universe, right? And I don't think that doing previews would be very likely to tell us that that's a problem that they're having.
I mean, even we could add it in 7 as well, right?
Sure. It's just like, I think the question will be how, right? Because I think, for example, you could imagine that one of the design points would be, we wish JSON serializer context would have derived from JSON serializer options or something, right? Like, those are the kind of things that we would have to decide now. So if we are confident we can edit later, sure. but depending on where the design is going, that might be harder.
Is that a thing? What you just said?
So I'm just saying, like, I mean, it depends on what the design is for it to make the scenario work, right?
I mean, I don't know that we would want to have done that emo because it would mean that we have a bunch of properties based on the current design criteria and the current design or current implementation, a bunch of properties that set themselves on first read by reading the options that would then be on the same object as all the options that you're supposed to be able to fiddle with. It would be very, very, very bad to ever have. I mean, we need to tell the debugger not to evaluate any of those properties. Otherwise,
Yeah, I'm not trying to
if you
make
hit
it
F10 in the
all
debugger, you've now destroyed your application.
Yeah, I just made some random stuff up. All I'm saying is that, like, I think I want to ship .NET 6 and knowing what the design is to make Steven's scenario work. Like, I don't want to start designing this thing by the time we do 7 because I don't have confidence that, you know, this will just work, like, because of the interactions that we have. I just try to make an example where that's obvious, but yeah, maybe not the best example.
If we
I
keep
don't think it's
set
really good
context,
for preview 4, but like, we need to think about it.
if we keep set context, then it'll be compatible with all the APIs we have today, but those things won't be able to link stuff out. Which is probably fine for ASP.NET, since that isn't the primary scenario for linking right now. But I don't know how it taints the design of like the context, because it does seem weird that they're linked both ways. But maybe it's temporary until we can think of a better solution.
In the fullness of time, do we believe that the existing APIs will not and should never be used? Like, is that moving forward? Is that our plan?
They don't have the benefit, like the benefits of the beta. Like I guess the only benefit is, say you just get some type from nowhere, then you might want to use that. But if you are like IoT friendly, there's, you know, the closure is well understood, I think you'd always want to use the newer stuff.
Well,
But
hold on. Is that so? If we were doing this from the very beginning and we didn't have a source generator and we had this context, wouldn't we still dynamically have to create the reflection fallback, or would that be opt-in?
If you pass in, the current design is if you pass in a JSON context, there's no fallback. It either gets the metadata from it or it throws.
Can we get the metadata? Can you write code to get the reflection fallback for a type and then pass it in? Is that a scenario?
You can use our advanced APIs to add metadata yourself. We don't want you to do that, but that's one thing. The other thing is just to generate your context and use the existing overload. So I'm hearing some noise.
Oh.
Someone's being a white noise generator.
Someone's TV's on.
Yeah. So I guess that's, in that case, you would want to use, like, the existing overloads would be fine for you, because if you don't have the metadata for a type, then.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think David's question is really more along the lines of, do we provide an on-ramp for someone who, and David, correct me if I'm wrong, but
You're
if you
right.
want to switch wholesale to the new APIs, so you always require a context, and I've got, 50% of my things using source generator, but I'm still getting types from elsewhere. I can still use the new call sites if I am able to create a JSON context for some type for which one wasn't compiled generated for me, and then over time, change my APIs to be passed to the relevant thing, because as we discussed last time, this JSON context thing is viral, right? If you have to pass one in, then you have to be given one along with the type that you want to be serialized.
So do you want, Steve, something like JSON serializer context dot get type info with reflection of,
like, JSON context dot create for T?
Yeah, that's why I suggested on JSON serializer context, because that's the public type.
Okay, yeah. I don't know if I want it, but I'm saying, like, that is the
Oh,
that would enable you to switch wholesale to the new APIs, whereas
So, and then that would
I'm
use
wondering-
reflection to build up the JSON type info stuff, and then
Yep.
it would just return you the pre-built, given the options that you passed in on that one call.
Okay,
Yep.
but who would call that method?
Dynamic code. I think there's a scenario for dynamic code that isn't being addressed here. I don't think the other API is legacy. I feel like it's just a separate code path, and it feels as though this new API does supersede it. But then you need some way to kind of get back the old behavior for those scenarios that aren't source gen friendly.
So you said dynamic code, like
Yeah,
where, like who would
I
know? Because
gen some new type on
it
the
wouldn't
fly.
be- but yeah,
Serialize that type.
okay, but it wouldn't be the serializer, right? Because that would root that reflection code. It would have to be done upfront.
No, I mean
somehow.
calling that method to get that type info, that would be
Right.
requires unreferenced code. So just like everything else in the world, you have the choice of dynamic or good linking or good trimming.
Right.
So I think this is just the hook for how can you get a type info to add into the world for a type that somebody didn't pre-generate, and it seems like a reasonable API. Again, it puts the box of this here is where reflection happened. We won't call this, aside from the current code paths. If you call it, that was your problem.
Right.
I think such an API is useful, and I think the easiest way to think about this is that the old APIs, there's one line of code at the beginning that says JSON type info equals, get from reflection, and it passes in the type. That's essentially what happens today. And then the new methods are missing that line of code.
Yep.
So today, my understanding of the 70K or whatever it is that we save for trimming with all this stuff is that some of it is reflection itself, but some of it is also a ton of other types that we end up rooting just in case one of them may have been in a graph, like immutable collections. Is my understanding correct?
Yeah, it's both of those.
So would we, if we went with something like this, would this enable us to at least get rid of all of that rooting for immutable collections just in case, even though we might still have to keep reflection? Like if I only used the new APIs, but I used that, get from reflection API, because we weren't implicitly keeping around all these other serializers, would that kind of be a middle ground? I would get some linking benefits, and I would be able to just use the new APIs.
It could
Wouldn't
be.
that API have to know about all the converters, the built-in converters?
I don't know. I'm asking.
Yes.
Why does it today? Maybe is the question.
I don't know.
Why?
I'm asking.
So yeah, okay. Yeah, so we don't know what the type is. We root all of them, we root all of them and then loop through to see whether any of them match with the type. I'm not sure that the implementation for these new suggested methods could do something different, unless it's code gen somehow. And then, but the code gen stuff is the existing stuff we're already proposing. So I don't know that the implementation for those type of two methods could do it without rooting things, because it could be because it's still if checks, right, to see if it's this type, then do that. So I don't know that it helps, but I can look at it. But my feeling is that everything will still be rooted. So I don't know whether it's why don't you just use the existing overloads in that case for the implicit fallback, and why are you doing things ahead of time yourself when it doesn't really give you any benefits as far as trimming stuff out?
Because it's a stepping stone, right? It's you can't make you can't make it all in one. You can't go from, you have an existing app that calls serialize all over the place, and you can only use source gen for 3 out of the 10 places. And so you try making a context everywhere, but since you can't get source gen, then you have this, let me fall back to the reflection case. right? That's the scenario here.
So
is it?
it's funny. So MVC, I'm thinking, so like it solves a couple of problems. Today, when you call serialize and you pass in a type, you have to do a lookup on a dictionary every time, right, to find the information based on the type. I can see, so MVC scans all of its controllers to find out what things can be bound for input and for output. I can see us actually calling this API and stashing it once per once per controller and once per action. I mean, we call serialize. We have that information in our hand, and we can just pass it into serialize async, avoiding any kind of lookup there as well. So it kind of lets the app model kind of look up the information for specific instances and cache that information. So it doesn't have to be cached inside of the dictionary. It can be cached in our structures by the caller.
So in that case, it's not the serializer that's calling these methods. Not just that case, but in any case, the user will do it to populate their JSON context, and then. But okay, so how do they, in their GetType info methods, do they hardcode the new stuff in there, or it's part of the implementation? Like if it's not one of these types, I know is in there, then like, generate the new thing and then return it, cache it and return it. Is that?
I guess one question is, if I pass, can you serialize passing in a type info, or do you have to pass in the full context?
You can pass the type info. That's what you want to do.
Yeah, that would work.
Okay, so you generate that and then you pass that to the serializer. Okay. Yep. I just want to be clear that there's no expectation that the serializer is calling this, because that's just root stuff.
No.
Okay.
Okay, so for the people who wanted the dynamic creation, did my doodle match what you expected?
Are options passed in there? Is that a thing, or is that just for type? Do you need options?
Because that controls do you want these to be camel cased or Pascal cased?
I see. Yeah. Yep.
Like there may be some defaults that I'm missing here, but that's my note for consider. So.
Yeah.
So, I see. This is different from the existing API proposal, where all the overloads that take JSON type info don't take options.
JSON type info things don't take options because options are already part of the JSON type info.
I see. Okay. And you're saying, David, that we would always use the JSON type info overloads, basically?
Yeah. Yep.
Even in the super runtime case, because just reflection. Yeah.
Basically, it's moving all the reflection out of JSON serializer and putting it into your hands.
Yep, into the callers.
But the implementation's still in JSON.
Sure.
Right. Yeah. It's just the API to opt into doing it.
Right.
But that makes it reasonable to call the other overload like legacy. If we want to do this move to a new API, it would basically make it possible to do dynamic or static lookup.
Does this, would the proposed API hit the cache inside of the options? It would, right?
My thing here?
I mean, if you're passing that directly to the serializer, then it doesn't need to hit the cache. It is the cache. Well,
my point being, if my hot path is calling serialize and I need to pass in a JSON context, do I need to cache this JSON type info, or can I every time can I just call create type with info via reflection?
I think create is expensive.
Yeah, you don't want to create that every time. You need to cache it within your context. You need your implementation of GetType info to, I think, to return it.
But doesn't options already contain a cache? Am I wrong about that?
Yeah, because Steve Harder gave the statement that basically the pseudocode for the current method would be create type info via reflection, and now call the new overload. Right. So if we actually just made that be the way that you did the lookup for the type on the options class, then it may be changing all of your plumbing, but conceptually you could make this new method that I wrote in Notepad, just call into the cache inside the options type. Right?
So I think the implementation today would or could when you first call GetType info, cache that in the options instance so that it knows it has the type. So that's what we do.
Well, so this gets to one of the comments that Steve had made, I think Tuesday, was that for really hot path scenarios, the dictionary hit is actually showing up in measurements. So if this doesn't use the cache, does that then mean that using the new overloads with this API actually gives you a perf benefit, because you can call this once, cache it, and then always pass that same one in without having to go through a dictionary?
I would hope so. Yeah.
That's what this will give you. If you
Okay,
pass
so
it directly.
this then not only has benefits in terms of migrating to the new APIs, but actually has a performance benefit.
Yeah, because you avoid the dictionary lookup.
Yeah, and there's one other aspect of that is that we do lazy instantiation, right? I mean, that's another goal, is that we don't need to instantiate all 1,000 POCOs or whatever you have. We can do incrementally as you start using them.
I did just think of one wrinkle.
No.
It's probably, I mean, I don't know the implementation of JSON type info. So you guys that know the implementation can say whether this would actually be a problem or whether it would just change where we did certain checks. But for hot reload, we're talking about how we need to clear caches when a notification is received. And how I had proposed doing that hand wavy for JSON serializer was have a static version number that's incremented anytime there's a notification, and the JSON serializer options would have a version number on it that was snapped basically to say, like, as long as this version number is the same as the global one, your cache is valid. And that would show up in the get or add method or whatever that method is called inside of JSON serializer options, where before the dictionary lookup, it would basically say if s underscore version does not equal underscore current version, clear cache. This API works around that because it's never checking that cache, which would mean that any kind of clearing would have to be done inside of JSON type info. And I don't know what that.
Well,
How is SourceGen going to work in this at all? On
well,
hot
SourceGen
reload?
would, if you make a change to the type, it should be regenerated.
And so, but I have the JSON context already statically somewhere.
Isn't the JSON context? Oh, because you already have an instance of it.
Right, like if
Yeah.
you go to the Razor example here, right? It was like private static JSON context, right in the middle. Yeah, right there.
so to me,
Yeah,
this doesn't
that's
seem-
going to be broken too.
right. This doesn't seem at all unique to this API, though. Like anything that does reflection and has a cache, right?
Right. I was imagining that changing the code would regenerate a new JSON context, and you're always accessing it via, whatever static thing is exposed. But if you've got an instance that you're carting around,
Right. Well, the hot reload would work for the top sample, where you're walking through the .default property to get the type info, because we could make
right,
the
that's-
.default
that's what I
instance
was
say,
imagining.
"Oh no,
That's
throw
what
away
I
all my
was
type
imagining would be
infos."
happening.
Yeah.
But apparently that's not what's happening. So it wouldn't work if you were actually holding on to that instance such that that instance wasn't getting recreated.
Right. Because technically, once
the
it's public API, you could build it yourself. So we can make special instances that know I'm based on
Although
reflection and hot
honestly,
reload. But
I'm not even sure it would work in the above case. Like if JSON context.default is just accessing a static field, changing members on JSON context isn't going to cause that field to be repopulated.
well, JSON context.default is the singleton instance, so it has instance fields. If the hot reload was inside this property, it could just return a new instance of default after the hot reload.
No, but what I mean is, like, if I add a field to my type, the source generator's in theory going to spit out the exact same code with the exact same public static JSON context default property.
Yeah.
That's not going to be seen as changing. So the instance that it was assigned to isn't going to be regenerated. That instance is going to have additional fields on it or additional members on it or something. But those
Then
are all
how
going
is
to be
that
their
gonna
default values.
Is that how it works?
But that would be part like the.
Well,
But the context itself will have new properties for those things, right?
because
Like
the
we'll generate the type of.
yeah, if it reran, if you changed a class that you had said you want to be JSON serializable, you change something, so edit and continue would rerun the source generators, which would redefine what your JSON context type look like. I don't know if that's going to immediately throw away any static instances or not, because I don't know how patching types works, but assume it doesn't. As long as this thing checks for the have I been hot reloaded, the default can then just reinstantiate the type, which will get the new definition, which has the new, if my field hasn't been accessed yet, go initialize it with the following characteristics, which would be the new
Sure, we would
generated
need
code.
to change the source generator for default to also do that check and to recreate.
Yeah.
It can no longer be a read-only, thing. It would have to recreate it based on
Right.
so that the constructor reran. If the constructor was doing something meaningful, I don't know if it is.
From the code Laomi showed last time, is the constructor is meaningless, but each property get is lazy instantiating with the literal definition that the type looked like at the time the generator ran.
In which case, something would have to clear those fields.
Yes.
So is the source generator, is this a production scenario or just like a design time development scenario?
It's
Both. Both?
.NET Watch Control F5 or F5.
Okay, so in production environment, there's going to be capability running the bookgen. I mean, Roslyn and whatever. I mean, there has to be, right?
In production, what do you mean by production?
I mean, you're not in development mode. You published it to a real server, and your clients are hitting it real time.
Oh no, we're not talking about that.
Okay. Yeah, it's just development.
Visual Studio.
Okay, and
I have an action item to test this out. I'll just say, but like even before this meeting, that was something I wanted to look into.
Yeah. Anyhow, so let's say the source we make the source generator thing work. I still question how this is going to work.
Well, the create type info via reflection that I made up on the spot during this meeting, we control the type info it returns. It could use the global counter bit and say I was created via reflection from this library, not via custom create. It could go mark itself or go rescan via reflection and rebuild it. Like, we can do dirty things if we think they're important.
Yeah, I think they will be important. We will probably need to do dirty things.
Right. So I'm just like, this could be special, but we can't make the ones that, or we can't necessarily make the type be special, because if you just created one by saying JSON type info of t.create and gave it all the property, like all the callbacks it needs to do all the stuff, like there's nothing to bind to on that. You built it out of nothing.
I think the net message, we're going to have to spend some more time prototyping around here, in particular from a perf perspective.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully we could link away all this stuff in any additional checks in.
I mean, yeah, I also assume that there's going to be a whole lot of stuff that just doesn't work right in edit and continue mode, and this could just be on that list.
I think this can't be on that list. There will be other stuff that doesn't work right. I don't think this can be it.
But I feel like you're not really measuring your perf when you're doing edit and continue.
No, I'm not talking about that. I want to make sure that when you're not doing hot reload,
we can remove the checks.
Yeah, exactly.
Fair enough. Anyway, so
yeah, maybe like if def or something.
So,
but anyway, so I have as a note to consider adding a thing like this to help bridge the things, and maybe now we can actually look at what one of these things is made of. Because we still haven't gotten that far.
Yeah, for sure. Options, the property that returns the options associated with the context is nullable because there's a state where it is not bound to an options instance. A protected constructor for when you create an unbound context instance. Another one which takes an options instance for when you pass an options instance. Initially proposed GetType info returns a nullable type. Could return null if you ask it for a type it doesn't know about. I think it shouldn't throw an exception here. Got a request for generic version. I still haven't followed up on how the implementation can be better and things like that. So I have this as sort of conditional for now. I imagine maybe we only did the second one if we can have a more optimized implementation for it, and not the first one.
If were you not there when David shared that code after the meeting?
Yeah,
last time?
I did, but I circled up to do so. I didn't look into the implementation yet. So if there's guarantees around it being better, then we don't need the first one. Then
yeah, I mean the tricky. So I'll take a note on it. The tricky thing is that we have two virtuals that are supposed to do the same thing, and I think we need to define, like, maybe we define the generic one that you have to go implement that yourself, and we make the non-generic one just call the generic one. And now if you make a suboptimal generic one, that was up to you. But I don't think we want both of them to be virtual.
I see. That's the issue. Two virtuals.
Yeah.
Okay, so the top one is not virtual.
And I guess the problem is the non-virtual one can't call the virtual one without doing complicated things.
Can we do the other way around?
But then you can't write your magical fall.
Optimized one.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Delete the generic one for now. I'll take the hit temporarily.
But even it's going to be the source generator that derives from this, right? Like the source generated code would have to do the generic trick.
But it can.
Yes.
Yes, it can.
Yes, it can. The problem is we can't have the non-generic. Making the non-generic version call the generic version is ugly, and I think Jan Kotis would yell at anyone who did it.
No, but I mean, we can emit both methods, right? We can keep them in sync because they're both generated by a tool, right? It's not that a human has to keep them in sync.
So I guess that this is a new world for us with generated code, right? If this was we think that we can have a tool that spits some stuff out and generated code's not part of an official build or an official concept or anything, we would just say you have two virtuals that can get out of sync. This doesn't make sense. This is a bad design. If we feel that we say that a type is only intended to be used by code generators, and if you extend it by hand, that's on you, then okay. I'm just trying to maintain our current design guidelines of don't make it impossible to implement correctly without being a machine.
I mean,
we also said that users could derive.
Yeah, I mean, users can derive from it, but I think realistically, if you derive from JSON serializer options, or let's start differently, right? If you actually look at the implementation of these methods in real apps, it's not going to check for 4 types. There's going to be like 30 or 40 entries in that. So you're not going to hard code this by hand anyway. So I think if you derive from this type, you do something like you're composing multiple of them, in which case you just take the argument and forward it to somebody else. Yeah. Use some caches or use some other stuff, but like I really don't think you implement any policy in there.
Well, but then you're now back to our sad state of you need to remember to override both to do the delegation on both because complexities. Like if you wrote my other notepad, this guy, you have to write both versions of this for loop. Otherwise, whichever one the implementation called is the only one that mattered, because it's not going to call both.
Right. I mean, we can also make both abstract, right? I mean, that's a decision we can take, right?
We could. In fact, I don't know why they'd be virtual if they're always overridden by a generator. So the virtuals maybe should have said abstract.
Yeah, because maybe you know that you're not in a situation where you would call that you're passing type info it directly. So, but yeah.
But anyway, like if we're comfortable doing it, we can certainly do it. It feels weird to me that we're adding a thing
of. In this case, I think it's a very specific case, right? Because the whole point of the generator is to lift the type system into the code, right? And so this is an example where you have a dynamic type system in terms of system type, and you have the static generic, right? So it seems I can see for generator cases where that pattern actually will be popular, where we need to handle both cases.
Yeah.
And yeah, as you said, one can't call for the other, so you
I guess
only have to admit both.
the real question is if GetType info of T is generic, who's calling it? Because if you were calling GetType info of T, unless you're maybe it's the composition thing here, but if you have the T, you would just read the property. Like if you knew what exactly you were looking for, you'd be like, oh, JSON serializer dot my class, instead of JSON serializer dot GetType info of my class, because there was a faster way to do it.
Well, that might not work if you are yourself a generic method, right? So yes,
that's
you,
fair.
You
Okay.
have a static T, but I don't know what the field
Yep.
is, right?
Composition. Composition's always the problem with generics. Okay.
So are we scratching the generic method here?
No, I would just keep both and say they're just emitted by the generator, and the generator keeps them in sync.
Yeah.
If you're deriving from them, like, yep, you have to do it by hand.
But they should both be abstract instead of both be virtual, because there's no
Yeah, I
default
think it should
implementation.
both be abstract.
This is the one version we get to do that in.
So we move on.
Yeah, so
I guess
the
I
one
still
question
don't get
still
it.
had is- sorry.
I still don't get why the generic.
Oh, perf. Speed. Run. What? Super fast.
Yeah.
Potentially fast. Potentially faster, I should say. It's much faster, actually. I should pay attention to the results.
You mean potentials, right?
Yeah.
Potentially fast. Yeah.
I guess I
mean,
would,
that's
unless we actually have it and are making it and have numbers to do it. I wouldn't approve it. I wouldn't want to put it in unless we knew.
do it in preview 5. That's fine.
Yeah, we can add an abstract later in .NET 6 if we think we need it.
It's faster,
Yeah,
but
so keep in mind the bar for views also goes up, so as adding an abstract member is a breaking change, so I wouldn't go for it.
default interface.
I like
I'm kidding.
that.
Yeah.
So I guess my other question is here, so earlier, like Naomi, you said there's a state where options is null. How do I observe that state? Because it seems like the default constructor will clone one, and the other one takes one. So
Sorry. Sorry. The cloning comment doesn't apply anymore. Comments are not. The options are not cloned. So when it's not null is, when the options are null is when the context is not bound, and we want to set the context.
Basically, when I call the constructor without the
Options,
and it's
yeah.
null, and then you call set default, so it set context on the options, and that will bind.
Yeah. I mean, if the, just thinking things out loud, if we do the generic version and we don't let it take an instance, you can completely hide this state and just, this could be get private set on the options, and you called JSON serializer options.add context of T, it says new T, which thinks it's using the default options, and then you go, haha, you have different options now. But because I'm all the same library, I know it's totally safe to replace them because I haven't called any of the members yet. So I think we can get rid of the state where options was null.
And that was basically what I was shooting for, because it seems a very unfortunate thing to have when it's just basically only occurring in infrastructure code that we control.
Again, users can derive from this class, right?
But the default constructor would just use the default options instead of the null options. Only the JSON serializer options.add context would do complicated things of replacing it.
I see.
And basically, you don't even need this constructor because you can just make all the generated JSON contexts call base with JSON serializer options.default. Or null or whatever.
I see. So if we still have the generic one, then we would call like an internal constructor.
Or it calls the public constructor. Options is not null. It's the default options. And then you don't care. You just overwrite them.
Oh, I see. You just set it. I see. Got it.
Because you can call the setter, no one else can.
Yeah. But do we want to waste the allocation, like passing in new options to call the public constructor?
I mean, it's up to you when the null gets materialized into a real options. It could be on the first call to get options,
it would just
right?
be null. I see. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, you could have the null exist, but when you call the options property, it makes itself the default options if you haven't already set it. Like,
yeah, got it. Okay, so yeah, that can be
The
non.
only question, the only question I have is like Jeremy's generic method. How does the newing up work? Because it sounds like it has to go through the activator create instance tab, right?
the individual JSON context classes, because this is the base class. The individual classes would have a default constructor that uses the default options, or the null options, or whatever.
Right.
But that generic method will call new paren, which works. No one has read the options property yet, so no one cares if it's observed to be in a was pre-assigned or is going to auto-assign itself as default. And then being inside the library, it sees that there's a private setter or an internal setter, and it sets the options before it causes a lazy load to go build them.
So there is no public JSON serializer options default. And so either you have to pass in null into the protected JSON serializer context,
or have the default, yeah.
Or you have to expose the default so the source gen code can use it. So like if you're going to get rid of the parameterless constructor, the second constructor has to be nullable options.
Yeah. Which seems fine.
It's basically what you, yeah. If you just equals null default it, then it's basically what you just have right now, right? And you're saying the options property, if the backing field is null, it'll use the internal default options. That's what it returns. Okay.
Etc. Hey, look, question mark equals. It's a new thing in C# that I actually like. Everyone should laugh now.
Good.
Alright.
Okay, shall we? Alright, so that namespace is dot serialization. This one is serialization metadata, because it represents type metadata. So the first one is the JSON type info, internal parameters constructor, so that people can't derive from it. We actually knew of instances of this like internally in system text JSON, so that's why it's not abstract. It has a public converter property that is needed in the generated code, so that they can get converters for like the different types they have in the object graph. The next thing is abstract JSON type info.
Right now?
The converter?
Yeah.
No, the converter should not be now. If we can fetch it or fetch a converter for a type, we throw not supported exception today, so it's the same behavior here.
So even for built-in types, there's always a converter. Like there's an int converter, a float converter, double converter. They all exist.
Yeah.
So where's the new converter come from for the new types? Like the generated thing, is that also generating a converter?
Yeah, like the internal like infrastructure methods I have below assign converters to those types. Well, for the like object and collection cases, for primitives we fetch them directly.
No, but when you say you want to, I think my class was the name of the class that you were running the generator on. if you get the JSON type info for the my class, it has a converter?
Yeah. It's an internal, it's not a regular, like, it's derived from JSON converter of T, but it's not like the one that we've exposed today. We have internal object, yeah.
How does
So
it
Sorry?
used? Like, what is it used for publicly?
Yeah, and why does it need to be public is the question, or the next question.
Yeah, I forget, but I do know I need it certainly. Sorry, I do not recall, but if I don't need it, I'll circle back and let you know. But I certainly do need it.
Yeah, the serializer uses converters for everything. So a POCO has a default object converter. Every collection has a converter. Every value type has a converter. So this would
sure, but that could be an internal property. It doesn't need to be public.
It may be that it should be.
Because I can't think of why anyone would ever need to talk about somebody else's dynamic converter.
Yes, I'm verifying. It could be that it just needs to be internal, and we refer to it. But I think I remember having to reference it in the generated code itself.
There are some edge cases. I don't know if this relates, Laomi, but someone could register a custom converter for a POCO. I don't know if this is that case or not.
But again, do they really need to read it back? Like, most of this looks like it's being opaque, which is good because it means that you can version without tying your hands.
I see.
It's why does this one piece of information need to be returned to the caller?
We don't need. I just verified the place where I'm referencing it internally. I can do it within SystemText JSON because I do need it internally, but maybe not in generated code. So I'll paste in something in chat.
Is JSON type info a thing that already exists today?
Yeah, internally.
I see. So because it says partially here, is there anything else on it, or is that the entirety?
You mean inside SystemText JSON? There's lots of stuff in it.
But you're not proposing to make all of that stuff public, right? You're only proposing to make the converter public, right?
Yeah, but even then, I think I don't even need to convert a public.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, while we're asking why did things need to be public, did we really need the options to have been public off the context? Is there a scenario for that? Like, you passed them in, does it have to give them back out?
Yeah, so you passed, Eric, I heard you would say something.
So the way I would set things on my options is I knew up options, set things on it, and then I pass that options into the new my JSON context. Right?
Yeah, well, because his statement is that constructor is going to run a copy constructor. Any future changes you made to the object are lost.
No, it's not anymore. It doesn't. We're not cloning any options. We hold on to the one you sent us because we don't need to. Just check whether it's been bound or not. If the options are bound, then we throw. If not, then that's the one we use.
Okay.
Yeah, I think to me the only argument for exposing the options is so I only have to hold on to one of them. Because it seems weird if I have to stash the options and the context. If I get a Because I mean, it seems like there will always be these two kinds of APIs: one that takes options, one that takes context. So it seems like I need both of them, right?
And if the answer there is so that if you took in a context, you could call a legacy API that only takes options, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
It was just a question of, do we have a scenario for having it be public? And if we
I mean,
didn't,
alternatively, we could also say if options always holds the context, then you just hold on to the options yourself, right? So like, I guess it depends on what we tell people to hold on to, right? But you generally only want to hold on to one of them, not both of them. That seems unfortunate.
You want to hold on to the context because that's going to have the properties for customer, order, etc.
Oh, because you need the type. Yeah, that's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Because if you hold onto the options, you get the base type, not the actual, like, not your context, basically. Yeah, the base type.
And we didn't even give you a way to get it back out above.
Yeah, good point. That's also true. So it's set only. Yeah, that's true. You want to hold on to the context. So yeah.
Yeah, I kind of think we need it public. Because I want to call into some third-party library that calls JSON serialize and it takes an option. Where do I get it from?
Yep.
Yeah.
Totally good reason.
Yep.
And then for your hierarchy, is it fair to say that every given JSON type info that I'm getting to is effectively a JSON type info of T? It's just that there is a base type, so I don't have to know the T?
Effectively, yes. Like we internally, like we treat type infos at the base type level, but yeah.
So I can downcast any type info to a JSON type info if I know the T?
Anyone that you would see, yes.
If you know the T exactly, because since it's a class and not an interface, there's no variance.
Yeah, anyone that is shown to you or that you've held on to can be cast to one of those T's. I mean,
Yeah. So my question is more like, does it matter how it got constructed, right? Because if I know I have a weather forecast somewhere, can I always say JSON type info weather forecast and downcast? And the answer seems to be yes. I mean, it also doesn't really seem to matter, right? Because I mean, so there's nothing on JSON type info that would matter. So why does this type have to be public?
Yet. Two things that it does, it allows you to not have to specify the generic parameter to the serializer method you're calling. The other thing is, this is where we would put the serialized object fast path when we get to that later, and for preview 5 hopefully.
It needs to be public because we're going to have public types derived from it.
Fair enough. That's a fair point.
JSON type info of T. What is deriving from?
I don't know. You said it was abstract.
It's abstract, yeah. Somebody better.
Did you mean sealed?
Oh no, internally, some things derive from it.
Right, like it has an internal constructor, so it's I mean, you can see.
It doesn't need to be.
You can see that this is not necessarily the type you're getting, but that it's in the type hierarchy, and you can't build them directly. You have to call things that build them for you. So, yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, I guess so. Basically, what you're saying is the reason JSON type info is public is so that you can use it to track the T, right?
Yeah. As overloads as an input to the serializer, and also when you want to have fast path stuff to deserialize or serialize DT.
Because here the deserialize call, it's deserialize of T, but my type is a JSON type info of T, so it lets inference run for you. And now this returns T.
But I can't pass in the wrong JSON type info, basically.
Right.
Mm.
Yeah.
You'd have to call this one where you get to mismatch the type in the info because it uses late association of the two.
Right. So then, the only thing that. Sorry, go ahead, Eric.
I was just going to ask about JSON info, the base class, is not abstract. JSON info, type info of T, the thing that people actually use, is abstract. and nobody publicly can derive from it because it
Yeah.
has an internal constructor.
Yeah, we don't want you to derive from it, but we have stuff internally that need to derive from it.
Why does it need to be abstract?
We don't want you to new it up.
You can't new it up because it's got an internal constructor.
Oh,
It's basically the internal class that the serializer uses. I mean, instead of creating another type and getting a little perfect by using two different types, it is the base class.
I mean, I think the answer is the implementation uses abstract, and it's really hard to tell the ref CS generator that the abstract was an implementation detail. I am surprised that JSON type info doesn't say abstract, though.
Yeah, I kind of assumed it does because of the partial, but yeah. Like, it seems to me both JSON type info and JSON type info publish should both be abstract with internal constructors, and then call it good.
yeah, I'll just require some refactoring to do it. The
What are
hierarchy.
the places in the code today that say new JSON type info?
What's
Even
the
if
code
there
that,
were, internally we can have an internal class that derives from JSON type info.
No, I was asking about the, like Emo stated, he just assumed JSON type info to be abstract. I'm asking, and Larry said we can't do that because we have internal use of that. So we have internal use that literally says new JSON type info.
Yeah, we need to refactor everything. Like, so we have this hierarchy to support like different type infos because we're generating code for user stuff. But we didn't need to do any of that like prior before with this effort. So everything was just like create a new type info, and so we can refactor stuff internally to make this abstract. It's just an effort that we have to do.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it really, as long as there are no public or protected constructors, it really doesn't matter if it says abstract or not. You can't instantiate the type. So it's just, it looks weird in the metadata that.
Exactly. That's why I was kind of assuming that they're both abstract, but like. Yeah, as Jeremy said, it doesn't matter. I mean, usually the only reason why you want to make it abstract is so that we can internally add abstract members in the future. But like, we can do that either way, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, because no one can successfully derive it because there's no constructor they can bind to.
Yeah.
So it's effectively abstract, even if it doesn't say it. As far as types outside your assembly are concerned.
So how does the system get property infos from a type? Because there's no way to get the property infos, right?
So
there's no public way.
Services.
Colors don't need it.
Yeah. So as far as the gen code is, we have methods to help you create instances of those, but users don't need to create them.
How does the user ever see a JSON property info then? How would they see one?
If they called this internal code, like that method you just passed.
Oh, it's public because the generator is using it rather than the user.
Yeah.
Right, because of that guy. Right.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah, the generator calls the factory and then passes it to other things that it did.
I see. So I guess the idea is that the generator will emit a type that is no. I guess it doesn't. Right? Okay, never mind. I don't know how any of this works.
Well, I think it's the generator will call, because this is compiler, or this is the generator metadata thing, right? So the generator calls metadata services create property info with all the details. It gets back an opaque object that it then just passes into this other thing.
Mm-hmm.
So this is
That's right.
I need to give you a handle. You don't get to ask any questions about it. It's just you pass the call from create property info to initialize object. That is it.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
No, that's how it works.
So internally we call it JSON class info today, right? That's
We
what
used
JSON
to.
type info. We used to. Okay.
Yeah.
And the reason being because it could also be a struct.
It could represent any type.
Right. So like JSON property info representing either a property or a field.
Yeah.
Do we want to call it property info if it could also represent a field?
Yeah, we talked about this a lot when we first added field support.
Well, I mean, it has the word JSON in front of it, and JSON doesn't have a concept of fields. It has a concept of properties.
Does it have the concept of a type, though?
It has a concept of an object and an array.
So, slightly.
Okay.
So
okay.
It depends
And
on
number.
what you want to have terminology in our source code. I mean, you know, do you want to say this is a JSON property or this is an abstraction of a CLR property or / member?
I think JSON member info will be too general because that includes things that are not property of fields.
Yeah, I mean, quite frankly, fields are just shitty properties, right? So I think I'm fine with saying it's just a JSON property info, right? So it seems.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, yes, it's not technically 100% correct, but it's close enough. So.
So the attributes, you specify the type, and to help resolve collisions, say, you know, two types have the same name, then you can guide us and help us choose the new name for the specific type. And that should be nullable string because you might not specify it.
Should the attribute also allow a type target so you can just put it on the type you want to pre-generate instead of having to go find a place to write down an assembly level attribute?
So that would mean we add a new constructor that takes nothing. And do we have to validate like if
That's
you pass
fair.
the type?
I got you.
But when writing testing code and having to do this for many types, like it's kind of annoying. So I empathize if somebody wants something like that. But
yeah, I mean we could add JSON serializable type attribute that's type targeted if we wanted.
I mean, honestly, like I would be okay with doing what Naomi suggested because realistically, when you have a generator, you can also raise diagnostics, and we can just completely fail the build if you apply this attribute at the assembly level, don't pass a type, or you apply it at the type level and do pass a type. I mean, we don't have to handle that, you know, in weird ways. We could make it actionable, but we can also start with saying that syntactic sugar, so you don't get to do that. You have to put the assembly level attribute for today, and it's fine. I mean, it doesn't really give you any expressiveness, right? It just gives you minor syntactic sugar. But I would agree with you that it would be nice to be able to do. Like if I write POCOs, I probably would like to put the attribute directly on the POCO rather than put it on the assembly level. But I think we always want the assembly level so you can put it on some other people's types. So
yeah,
like list. So do we want to say that its attribute targets are assembly, class, and struct, or
I would just
make
for previously we'll just leave it as assembly and then we can add it later.
Right, and like
it's pretty easy to.
If we want to avoid the mismatch state, we can just make a second attribute the generator knows about called JSON serializable type that is only applicable on class and struct.
Sure. To me, it does the same thing, but yeah.
I mean,
we
add another assembly and then we eliminate an error condition. So.
Sure.
I have one question. Do we normally add attributes? I mean, we do. Sometimes you can do a source time attribute that doesn't require a new type in the BCL. Do we want to do that more here, or do we want to actually add attributes? I mean, I guess either is fine, but.
Well, the problem is this. I mean, the line I would draw in the sand is if the attribute is only needed by the generator, that the generator then applies, it's fine. If we expect the user to be able to type it somewhere, I would put it in the BCL. And the reason, part of the reason is because you have this weirdness in the when does the generator run? Did it already generate the attribute or not?
Yeah.
But also there's no documentation, right? If the type doesn't exist anywhere, we can't document it really easily, right? So that you end up in these weird half states. Nullable attribute, nobody cares. It doesn't have to be documented because it's purely infrastructure for the compiler. So yeah, we didn't ship that one.
Yep. Got it. Carry on.
This is a change though, since we talked about it on Tuesday. On Tuesday, I thought we were saying this attribute was going to be source generated, and now we're saying it's going to be part of the core libraries.
Well, some of us didn't like it was going to be source generated because it was going to start popping up in random assemblies that didn't even care.
All right, so this is in response to someone being Jeremy's feedback, which is fine. I just wanted to check.
Well,
It's also
I have very similar opinions on this. I mean, it seems like there's a meeting next week that somebody, I think Aaron forwarded me to this, that we should talk about this. But I think there's experience issues if we don't make it a BCL type.
Okay.
Yeah, the emo pointing out the documentation thing is a thing I hadn't thought of on Tuesday.
You also get type collisions, right?
Yeah.
If there's an
Yeah,
attribute
type
in
of
assembly A
interfaces.
and assembly B, and I reference both of them, even if it's internal, like internal's visible to both of them.
Okay. Well, don't use internals visible too, but
People do. People do.
I have no concerns. I just wanted to make sure we were explicit because it did seem like a change in the last 2 days.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I think not everybody is happy with, so we should definitely have a conversation and close on that.
Yeah.
All I'm trying to say is Jeremy is not the only person with concerns.
Yeah, I feel like I was in fact a Me Tooer on that one. So, though actually I think that phrase has a different meaning these days, so we'll move on.
The one question I have also, like, I'm not sure what the right point to raise it is, like, the namespaces. Do we want them in these namespaces, or are we okay with collapsing some of them?
The JSON serializable attribute probably, because someone's going to type that one, we probably want it to be in either JSON or serialization.
I'd assume serialization, right?
I think serialization is better. But, yeah, okay.
Do we really want the internal namespace? I kind of thought we didn't do that anymore.
Where do you see it?
So
we're not there yet. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I think my recommendation would be, like, it seems the attribute should be in serialization because users generally don't want to use JSON type info or type property info. That's just for the generator itself. But they do want to reference that attribute from user code, so I would put everything that's user code basically in the existing namespaces, which is either SystemText or JSON or SystemText or JSON serialization. And then I would probably have just one namespace for the generator. So I would probably collapse the metadata and the metadata internal one into one. I probably wouldn't use internal. I would just live with the fact that we have one type in there that we say editor browsable never, and that's good enough. Because, I mean, internal is weird anyway, because as the follower experienced the hard way, it's like you can put this all day long there, but you can't make breaking changes there either way. So it's just use it to de-emphasize, but editor browsable does the same thing. Like, how much more do you need? And the type is not enough to use by hand, so it's not people will do it.
So just leave it internal and rely on the editor browsable never? Or can we choose a different name?
The note that I took on that is collapse metadata and metadata internal just into metadata.
Yeah, either metadata or generation. I mean, I probably would go with generation purely because if that is the namespace we use to dump stuff that only the generator is using, is this only ever going to be metadata related, or is there other stuff in there?
Yeah, you can imagine features where people want to programmatically like set metadata for their types, and that's how I started thinking about this early, at first.
Yeah,
but it's kind of risky because it restricts us. Like if I expose the shape of the type, then we can't. It's harder to change things. Not that we can change things willy-nilly with this, but it's nicer.
I mean, I think metadata's fine because the namespace will show up on like APIs of .NET because that's where JSON type info of T will live, and metadata seems better than generation. Generation's the purpose we added it for. Metadata is the role it serves. It's like calling a type extensions, which we've said that's why you added it, but that instead described the purpose it serves.
I mean, especially if we added the other method that we talked about, right? The static create from.
Oh, that went up on this guy. Or wait, this guy.
Yeah. It went on that, but it returns types in this namespace.
Oh yeah. And that would
And
return
that
types
didn't do
from
any generation there,
metadata.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's also likely we're going to add additional properties to these types and additional classes because there have been other feature requests to expose metadata and similar features for advanced converters for objects and collections and things like that that would keep metadata.
So I think metadata is a better name than generation.
Yeah, that works for me.
We probably want to put the word JSON on metadata services just so we're not having a super foofy name. You don't expect anyone to call it, so it doesn't matter how long its name is.
That's okay. Okay, so these are methods that create these metadata instances. The first one, create value info of T. It will, yes, it just takes an options on the converter for the type and it returns the type info.
What's the difference between value info and object info?
Object info represents an object with pocos and it has properties and fields, things like that. So we add properties, but value info is for things like integer or string.
Like a primitive.
Like a primitive, yeah.
If I was going to do there's no array. What would I do if I wanted to do an array of something?
There's array. I think this is the fifth method.
Oh, it's lower. Yep. Sorry. Yeah. Yep. Got it.
So create value info is generic, but only supports like 7 inputs.
Yeah. We just need to know what the T we're returning is because we need to assign it to a property of a type info property.
And if I call it with one of those, not one of those, it throws.
This really represents things that have custom converters. Like, so if you have like a POCO that you added the runtime custom converter for, it will also come here.
Okay, so create value info is any T that has a custom converter.
Yeah.
And should this be a JSON converter of T, or is it just JSON converter?
JSON converter is fine. We assign it to JSON converter internally, and there's some polymorphic cases where you might write a polymorphic converter that might not be T specifically. Where, like, your converter returns a derived type and you're assigning it to a base type.
Okay, so this is you want. I should know the word on this. Contravariance, but you can't do it without an interface. Okay.
So JSON object of. Can we proceed? Actually?
Yeah, I mean, the type is EBNever, so people shouldn't be calling this. So it doesn't matter 100%. But my interpretation of Eric's question and the feeling that I have is, how do I know if I'm supposed to call create value info or create object info?
You do create object info when the type is like a POCO and there's no custom converter for type. But users don't need to, shouldn't be doing this anyway, but that's when the generator does it.
Okay. Would I ever pass the JSON info, the type info that came back from create value info into initialize object?
No, that would throw an exception.
Okay.
Is there a reason create object and initialize object are two separate calls?
Yeah, because objects can reference themselves. So I can have an object and that a property is that object itself. So we need
a graph where a node has a node child. Okay.
Yeah, that's why it's different from the rest where we first create and then initialize.
Okay. So creating the object info of T really just makes a placeholder so that you can call initialize in a possibly circular manner. Okay.
Uh, initialize object of T, takes the type info. It's generic because today we expect it to be that T, so it provides a little validation there. We need the options. Then we take a func that creates an instance of the T. That's a parameterless constructor. Later on, I'll bring another API that supports a parameterized constructor. So I just wanted to note, initially I had this as like delegate, like where it returns an object and no parameters. Got some feedback advising a func, but then I restated that, parameterized constructors can come next. So I guess open question, like, should we define delegate signatures here, or just, I think the func for parameterized constructor will just take an object array and then return T. So maybe you just express it as a func still. I just wanted to note that that's the third parameter of initialize object.
I mean, that's
You asking?
that's going to be true. Like, if we want to make the parameterized constructor and the parameterless constructor use the exact same call path, that would, basically be func of IEnumerable of object or object bracket bracket to T. It seems like the case where you are default, we can do the nicety of just func of T and avoid the complex parameter ignoring.
Oh no, I mean my thought was to add in a different method for the parameterized one, or just how to express the func, whether it's like some custom delegate signature or use func. Was what I was asking.
Well, I mean, so the guideline answer we have is use func unless you can't, like one of your parameters is by ref.
I see. Yeah, that will not be the case for the parameterless constructor. Parameterized constructor support.
Yeah. How would the parameterized work at all?
Still kind of thinking, but you define your func, and the func will take an object array, and it will unbox those and then pass it to the constructor, the parameterized one that we can call.
So it would be func of object array comma T.
Yeah. And that's kind of how we do it internally for the serializer, but we have a fast path where we don't box if you have less than four parameters.
So if I was like point with X and Y, that had only one constructor that took int X, int Y.
Yeah, would. But I don't know, it's up to us if we want to add that's like optimization here. I'll be satisfied if we just do the object array one, at least first, unless there's more time to do more stuff.
Are we planning on supporting parameterized constructors in 6?
Yeah, I mean not in preview 4, but
great.
Yeah,
okay.
I would like to not ship with like serializer supporting one set and then.
Yeah, I mean, depending on who's supposed to figure out the order of association of the parameters and whatnot, it seems like it will probably end up being func of iRead-only dictionary of the string to object, comma, T.
Why that?
Well, once depending on how all this metadata shakes out, it's how is the caller supposed to know which order it should put the parameters in, because it can't see it can't see parameter types or names on the thing once it just takes an object array. So it wouldn't know if it needs to call it with X comma Y or Y comma X.
No, I mean, but we can determine that, and like the generated code will know the order in which the serializer will send it.
Okay, I mean, as long as something somewhere is going to say, here's the order of my parameters, and you can figure that out, then sure.
Yeah. And
otherwise, it seems like a dictionary.
Okay, if that's the case, then no, but I think that I can enforce.
Anyway, I mean, that'll come in when you figure out how the feature works.
Yeah.
I just, I'm we were speculating, but since we're over time, maybe we should get through what's already on the screen.
Yeah.
Number handling? Why isn't number handling coming from the options?
Because you can set, there's a number handling attribute to specify that this is the number handling for all the number type properties on this POCO. So we need to honor that.
And there's okay. If there's,
then,
is there any other one that we're gonna need that's separated? That's part of the options. That's gonna be separated from the options.
No, this is the only one for. There's no other like attribute on. Or there's the converter. I think that's represented somehow.
Should JSON number handling be nullable? Because somewhere there should be the, like, I guess, is it a thing that you can specify in the options and as an attribute? Or is it only an attribute?
It's both.
Yeah, so...
Like you can set in the options and in the attributes, yeah.
So assuming that you want specifying this to win, I don't see a current option that is ask the options. Which means you would need to make this nullable.
That's done. No, that's done internally. Yeah, well, yeah, I think that's what I had initially, and that's what, and I changed it because I said, okay, the default is, yeah. So nullable should mean nothing was specified, and that was my reason about it before. But then if, and that should,
because otherwise you'll end up passing JSON number handling.strict, and then you'll say they said strict, so ignore whatever the option says.
Yeah.
So, nullable is the I didn't have an option.
Yes.
I thought the idea is that Laomi's engine will basically make the determination and pass you either the one that was applied or the options one. But at the time your code runs, like it's clear which one to use. Because there's always one answer, right? It's either the one that you put on the attribute or it's the one from the options.
So the behavior if nothing was specified here, then we'll pick from the options. But if the
generator can, I guess the generator can see the options because it passed it as the second parameter. So I guess the generator, if you didn't have it on the property, it could call options.default number handling and just pass that here, which is all that the method internal is going to do. So I guess the generator can figure out the right value to pass.
Yeah.
And then this is the answer because it was either specified or it came from the options, but the generator knew the answer and wrote it down. Okay.
Right.
So we're relying on the generator, okay.
I mean, but to Eric's earlier question, right? What happens if we add another thing for, I don't know, string processing or something? Are we keeping adding overloads to this, or should we consider having a sort of context struct that where we can just add members to that and then we pass that to every single function that creates an object?
Like an options class?
Well, it would have been something like, the effective options or something, right? I mean, I guess we could say that for every option that you can do locally, there's a global one, so we can always reuse JSON serializer options, and worst case, we assign to it. But that seems unfortunate, given that that options has cache, has a cache, right? Because you validate that cache every time you do that.
And converters and things that don't apply on a per property basis.
Yeah. So I feel like, yeah.
If we add something in later, then we add a new overload. And then the new source gen uses the new overload, and the old one is working.
I think when we add the next thing that is a property specific attribute feature, then we'd figure out what we want to call the property specific grouping, and then the next overload switches to that. Doing it now seems maybe premature.
Yeah.
Unless we have a great name for it, in which case, go for it.
Great property info is.
I mean, the next methods are kind of indicative that maybe we should do this already because it takes like 12 arguments already. But yeah.
Well, but this isn't. This is just I'm a property. Here's get set, right?
Yeah, those ones are not about features. That's like we need them. The number ignore condition number handling are about features. So it's just 2 right now. But yeah, we'll definitely add more of these, like for more features in the future. So if we had like a type that housed all these things, some class, what could we call it? Like,
Yeah, I mean because the problem, if we made a thing that took these 11 things, we would call it something like JSON property info. And then we'd need a way for you to build it, which would be a constructor or a method that took this many parameters. And this is that. Like, this is the garbage the generator has to call to get one of these opaque objects.
Yeah, never mind. Like I was just thinking the wrong way. I thought these are all callbacks, but no, it's like this is the code that the generator invokes. So even if there are overloads, it's still clean code, right? So it's fine.
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, like yeah, never mind.
And anything that's not used, the linker can trim out. Are there any questions?
JSON encoded text. That's a thing. I did not know that was a public thing for the JSON property name.
Yeah. It's a balance of safe and performance.
It's UTF-8 string. Sort of.
Well, it handles things like if you left the BMP, it has to do \u. Like, it has to do the UTF-8 coding of \u, whatever. So it's not just UTF-8 string. It's a pre-escaped UTF-8 string.
Okay. I got one more question. Are we almost done? Create list info and create dictionary info with T collection. Like how does that work?
Yeah, it's to create an internal array converter and list converter and dictionary converter and return the type info.
I mean, what type goes into T collection?
T collection is anything that derives from list in this case, and for the dictionary one, anything that derives from dictionary of T value. So so this is one strategy. I will be bringing more to support the other collection types. Next preview.
So why do we do it for list, not iList, and not iDictionary?
These are the ones I say are the most popular, like the most likely people would use. Maybe enumerable of T, since.
But the question is, does the serializer currently support any iDictionary, or does it only support dictionary?
It supports any iDictionary.
So this should just be iDictionary, and list should be iEnumerable.
It's just that there's some better performance if you use the actual concrete type.
But you have the concrete type. This is just your generic constraint that we're talking about. Like,
it's just okay. So linker trim is the other thing. So if we have this one method to support two of those converters, then we're routing a converter we don't need. So that's why everything is separated out into its own method. So it's one per converter.
Sure, but this where T collection extends dictionary, it should just say where T collection implements iDictionary. You don't care if it's dictionary or
we have another
dictionary
converter that does iDictionary. So would I add another method that says create generic iDictionary info?
Maybe I'm confused, but like, why can't your implementation check that? Like, your implementation can basically say, well, is the T extending dictionary or is it extending iDictionary, and then do the right thing, right?
Well,
if I'm using emo dictionary, where emo dictionary is just iDictionary and not extending dictionary, if it works with the serializer, how will it work with the generator?
Because we'll add another method that supports that where T collection derives from iDictionary. It's just not here yet.
Okay, but
they'll handle the separate converters today in the serializer. There's one for iDictionary.
Yeah, I can show. Yeah.
iDictionary. And then derive.
Yeah, I guess it depends on how you want to expose that, but I would think that if people actually derive, they're not necessarily deriving from list or dictionary. They usually derive from, collection of T or read-only collection of T or whatever the dictionary equivalent of that one was. I forgot. Like it's keyed collection or something like that.
Yeah.
And then list is usually used by itself into a dictionary, right? So I that's why
Okay.
that's just suggesting if you do iList and iDictionary, you basically have 99% of collection types that people will actually use in practice. Like you're not very likely having to extend that. But I guess I'm not entirely sure what you mean by perf benefits, because like are you saying you have different implementations for a dictionary and an iDictionary?
Yes, I just posted in the chat like the list of all the converters that we have to handle collection. So it's basically one converter for each of these types.
Yeah, just keep in mind you can't overload based on constraint, right? So if you want to add iDictionary and iList later, you have to give the methods different names. If you want to have different implementations for that.
Yeah, I'm hoping that we don't have to add another feature. Even number handling could have been implemented as a converter, quite honestly. So we don't have to pass it around. But I'm hoping that once we have these collection types, we don't need to add more variations of them. We just need the type info for the key type or the value type, or type info for the element type, and I think that's all the information we'd ever need.
Right, but right now with the generic constraints on create list and create dictionary, if I have a custom iDictionary, I can't switch from the reflection serializer to the generated serializer because there's no way to create my type info.
Yeah, like I'm going to come back and add that.
Right, but preview 4, anybody with a custom enumerable type or a custom dictionary cannot try the feature.
Yes, they will have eventually that type will cause a not supported exception, and it will just be temporary for preview 4. But we compare it. Well, I guess we can generalize it. So is the suggestion generalize it for now, or maybe always, or add the support for all the types now?
The worst case is if you say iDictionary here and you have a specialized dictionary versus iDictionary thing, that because they created any dictionary, you root both of your converters. I don't know that's terrible.
A lot of the size gains for Blazor was due to removing unused converters. So I don't think we want to root anything that.
But we're talking one converter.
So if you have three of those cases where it's iList and list, dictionary and dictionary, and maybe one other thing and some other thing, enumerable and set or something, then now instead of 3, you are rooting 6.
Yeah, so I think that's fair. If you want to say I want to have a way how I can tell the linker that they're using iDictionary versus dictionary, then yes, you need different methods. And all I'm saying is you can't overload. So that just means if you want to add iDictionary later, the method has to be called create iDictionary.
Yeah, it's a very different name.
Right?
It's what I'm thinking.
And that's
fine. Which might be okay, right?
Yeah.
But if that's what you want to do, if that's the goal, then that makes sense. I mean, it's just called by the generator. I mean, Jeremy has a bit of a point. Like, if the only thing we support is dictionary and list right now, that's probably good enough. But my hunch is that there's a lot of people that actually use iDictionary or iList for that matter.
If there's some recommended ones you say like do it now, then I can prioritize that. It's not.
Well, I just think for the preview 4 API that you want to take the create list info and create dictionary info, duplicate them, and maybe we are weird and call it iList info and it takes enumerable. But like whatever the serializer supports in terms of these implicit the interfaces that determine the way that you're going to change the serialization, somebody needs to be able to express this with the generator. So basically you want the if you want to distinguish between dictionary and iDictionary is more important because it's more users, and dictionary is more important for perf. So you have to do both of them right now.
Okay, take the bet.
Or you're cutting off preview 4 feedback.
I see. Okay, can I bring this to the email thread to add the rest of the collection types, or generalize them such that we?
Well, them being separate methods makes sense, and I think we just like what we've said here is you've you've cut off features from the serializer with the current proposal. And
Okay,
you need to
so
add them.
we can add, we'll add all the, it's okay to add all the collection types. It's just copy and paste and change the internal stuff. That's fine.
Yeah.
Sorry to go back up. I had one more question. There's a CLR property name.
Mm-hmm.
Do we like CLR in sort of public API?
I do not, but I also didn't have a better idea. I mean, actually, I do have a better idea. Metadata name.
Yeah, I don't know if that's better.
IL property name.
I object as
No one would
the initial holder of IL. I'm objecting to IL.
Mono property name? Mono property name? Is that one okay?
Well, I think CLR is a bit specific. I give you that. I think in Roslyn, that's also metadata. In Roslyn, they have APIs like where you can look up types by metadata name, which means you have to use the backtick 1, backtick 2 syntax, for example, for generic types. In this case, metadata is unfortunate because this whole thing is metadata, so it might be a bit misleading.
I was going to say ECMA 336.
I mean,
we can call it
just say
declared property name.
That works, yeah.
Yeah, because like, can I put an attribute that? Oh, this
Yes.
is no. Even if I put the attribute, that's the JSON property name.
Right.
Yes.
This one's literally the property name in IL.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you put declared there, I mean, you could say, well, is that the declared JSON property name or the JSON property name? But yeah, I think declared could work as well.
I mean, CLR is definitely very expressive. Like, it's very obvious what we're talking about there. I just questioned if that was the right term.
I'm even okay with just calling it property name because the very next one is the JSON property name, right? That also distinguishes it, right?
We're using CLR here to mean C# language runtime, right?
Yes.
Or as was just discussed on Discord, the Cyrus language runtime.
All right. So are we saying this should just be property name?
I mean, property name is fine. Declaring property name is fine. Runtime property name is fine. Pick any of those.
Yeah, because my only fear is somebody else that later is like, oh, I want to call this thing CLR blah. And it's like, well, look here, there's an API called CLR property name.
Yeah, CLR is not great. That's full of fair.
All right. I put rename it to any of property name, declared property name, or runtime property name.
One more question about collections. The create object func, like, do we know how many things are going to be in the collection up front at all? Like, can we pass in a capacity? Or is it always like a streaming thing? We don't know.
Yeah, we don't know how many objects will be in the JSON. And I think that's one of the things where we shouldn't allocate data based on like some, well, that's different. It's not coming from the JSON, but yeah, but we don't know upfront. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. All right, that was all my questions.
A bit weird, right? I guess. Well, when you call these guys, or you call them statically, right? So you call them before you ever deserialize, so you don't know what's in the payload yet.
You call them while you're deserializing, right? There's a payload of JSON coming, and you're like, okay, I need to create the collection for this, you know, on customer, the orders collection. So I'm going to call this func to create the actual object, right?
No, I thought that these things are static. They're created by effectively the constructor of the JSON context because they are, it's the fixed type system, right? It's just you no longer have to reflect. You already know the answers.
Right, and that this func lets you do that, right? This func, you take in nothing and you say new list of orders.
Oh, you're talking about the func itself.
Yeah.
The func gets evaluated every time you deserialize. Yes, so the func could take this capacity.
Yes, when it sees orders : it has to call this func because it doesn't know where the closed square bracket is yet. So it doesn't know how much stuff is between here and there.
Yeah.
How does it do array? It just makes
I
a
think
buffer.
List.toList.
List
Yeah,
that to
was the
To array.
the
Okay.
list
Or yeah,
and then
list.toArray.
Sorry. Yeah.
Arrays are expensive. They're bounded.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, I'm done.
And then the converter provider is just all the ones you already have.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the feedback that I'd given in private is we could put these if we wanted them to be public on the non-generic JSON converter, but I don't care. I just seeing if anyone else cares.
I would honestly call them like built-in converters or something.
We could call them that. Or I don't mind it.
Does it make sense to be in the metadata namespace?
And that's the only reason I'm exposing it for source generation. The other way to get it today is like you call options.getConverter and type, and then we'll return one of these.
I mean, the other question is, any reason we can't merge it with metadata services?
No, we can put it there. We can put it in there.
We can or we cannot?
We can. I mean, no reason not.
So you want
Because
to
it seems
have
like it's,
But
get
it
rid of
just-
this type boundary and then just put the word converter on all of these things?
That's what we need to do
yeah.
if we did that.
Because I mean, realistically, it's like the entire metadata services thing is just a glorified factory for getting the building blocks, right? And converters are building blocks as much as property infos or type infos or whatever else we have here, right?
Yeah, but if we don't put them on JSON converter, then like we're saying, we're never going to expose any primitive built-in converters. Maybe we're not saying that, but it's
I mean, we have the option of adding them on JSON converter in the future, and then the JSON metadata services .boolean converter just calls JSON converter .boolean. Like, we can't remove the members, but we don't. This doesn't stop us from exposing them in a better place later.
I mean, you can also put them on JSON converter now. That would also work. I mean, it's probably not a type people will actually got into the aesthetics today. That also makes sense to me.
Yeah, because that's what we would do if we wanted anyone to ever call them, right? Because it would just
Yeah.
be the generic accelerators. But I don't know that we care, which is why I brought it up, but I don't personally
I guess
care
it
what we
depends on
decide.
the use case, right? If the use case is entirely always effectively within the generated code, then I think merging the metadata services makes sense. If you think that there are other legitimate use cases where you just want to get the converter for short, let's say, then putting them as statics and JSON converter probably makes more sense.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think we've ever gotten a request to expose the internal primitive converters. And if people wanted it, I'm sure they would have asked that by now.
And because why go only forward when we can also go back? To return to CLR property name, there was some YouTube chat suggestion of member name. That way it also encompassed fields. That also.
Yeah, I think we had this discussion earlier, right? On JSON property info where we said screw it, it's just.
Well, but we
good
said
enough.
property was fine because it's describing a JSON property, but once the CLR data item is a property or a field, and calling it member name avoids the JSON property versus property name. Like, I think it's a reasonable suggestion. I can add it to the list of things for Leomi to consider, or we cannot.
It just seems weird to say like member name and next name is JSON property name. Like,
But then you have to think about them. Why are they different? And since only a generator is calling it, no one thinks. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, I put it in the list of suggestions.
Do we decide on where to put these converters? In metadata services? Or was that not decided?
I'm torn.
Can you conceive of a reason that in .NET 6 anyone other than a source generator would want to easily access the uint16 built-in converter.
I mean, like Laomi said, he hasn't seen anybody ask for this.
Yeah, so I think putting them on JSON metadata services until people actually ask for them seems fine. It just puts fewer things in people's faces when they're writing their own converter. Because if you're writing your own converter, all the statics would show up, right? So it's like, oh, do you want to talk about, or which uint16 do you want at this point? In fact, that would actually be ambiguous for like GUID. In fact, it would prefer the property, I think. So that's a reason to not put it on JSON converter. So JSON metadata services it is.
Cool.
2 more chunks.
Yeah.
Yep.
The first chunk is new overloads that we've been talking about. For the JSON serializer and.
As it is 3:30, I would like to point out, Emo thought we'd be done with this by 2. All right.
I kind of didn't, so that's why I.
You said first hour.
Email.
All right.
Yeah, I know.
All right.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
So
Leo.
methods on JSON serializer. Basically take all the overloads, multiply by 2. Wherever we are passing a type, we pass the context. Whenever we use the generic T, we pass the type info. And then next are the system needs TCP JSON methods, overloads. So that's similar thing. I think there's some cases where the options were not passed in those APIs. So those ones they don't have a replicate here. I assume we assume the default options in those cases. But wherever we did pass options, multiply, take that, and then where we pass a type, take the context. Where we pass the T, take the type info.
For the cases where we didn't take a JSON serializer options, do we still want or need to take a JSON serializer context so that you can get the pre-generated version?
I think those are represented already with the rest of the overloads.
Well, because presumably it would be that you expect that you're getting like a string, and it's like, yeah, string is string, you didn't need any options, but it's still gonna need to do reflection to figure out that it's string and that string was special, and right?
Yeah, maybe I missed some distinction about those methods, like why the options were not in there.
Fair enough. I mean, yeah, we can add them later. It just feels like if they're calling into JSON serializer, then we're now missing something, and there will be reflection. Reflection will be done by those methods, and there's no way to avoid it. Or maybe it's you then have to write a much more complicated thing to avoid it. But
yeah, I'll check them. I'll look at all those overloads and see if we need the ones that don't take options for all the system native TCP JSON stuff.
In the current, or maybe it's not the current prototype, but in the prototype that I was using, we did have T methods that just took a context, right? Like get from JSON async of T to take a JSON context, right?
Well, it took a type info.
Well, no,
Yeah,
like an older version, right?
Yeah, it might have been copy paste error. Like, do you see a scenario where you would want to pass the context there and not the T? And why you wouldn't use the one that takes?
It's a little bit less verbose is kind of the thing. Like so in where we had it, like this is, I'm gonna paste it into the chat. This is what we called, right? Forecast equals await get from async of weather forecast array, and you just pass in the context. But here you'd have to say context dot weather forecast array. Especially like the default names are kind of verbose on them.
I see.
Well, I mean we could certainly add that, but by taking the T, you can get rid of the generic call because it will be inferred by the last parameter. So you would have context.weatherForecastArray, and now you get rid of the angle brackets.
Also, there's a bit of a perf hit because we'll have to call get class type info for type in that case. I think that might be the same thing that Jeremy just said. Oh no, I think you're talking about the generic parameter.
Yeah, mine is.
You're saying I turn the above into. It's coming. Like this, which is roughly the same length. It's just I'm moving the generic right to there where Jeremy has it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, if you specify the name on it, you can you can get really short. But silly lack of an undo stack. But yeah, I mean, so again, we could add it. It's probably an anti-pattern to use though, so maybe we should hold off on
true. Like Naomi said, it's not a performance trap, but it's less performant. We want you to use this one, so let's just have that one until. Okay, I'm fine with it.
Yeah, and it goes with it's generally nicer if you don't have to use the generic specifier and you let inference just do the right thing for you.
Yeah. Except for when you use bar. Because then if you made a mistake, it's like, I'm fine with your mistake.
Fair enough.
Okay. Question answered.
So what's next? The fast pass stuff we've been talking about. More collections, parameterized constructors, and polymorphic support when we do it. I think asynchronous removal needs to be here as well, since we're about to have that support. So I will be back.
But we did get through everything. So
Thankfully. I appreciate the effort and
huzzah.
Thanks.
The good thing is let's get this in .NET runtime. So then people can play with it and we can get feedback and
yeah.
That's my main goal.
For sure. Yeah. I'll working on that.
Okay, I have a giant set of notes. And then I guess I should go merge all of these things in with the suggestion, or email, will you let me off the hook if I don't do that?
Sorry, when you don't do what?
Well, typically when you only have 3 suggestions on things, you take the proposal and make the 3 suggestions and then paste it. But there's a lot of suggestions here, and I'm lazy.
Oh, it's fine. It just paste it as is. I mean, we're already late for this meeting, so I would just capture the notes, and then chances are we will churn this anyway in the next couple of months, so it's not going to be the final thing anyway, so it's good enough in my opinion.
Okay, for anybody who's still on the call, do you feel that there was a note that I didn't capture?
That looks to accurately cover everything that I heard.
Thank you, Tanner.
I may have zoned out during part of it, though, so...
Only May? I'm pretty sure you did. I can hear it in your voice.
Yeah. We only took 45 extra minutes here.
No, I can. My face probably says the same thing. So then the only thing I want to say is, like, I mean, we spent a lot of time talking about this. I hope that neither Leoben nor Steve feel like we're just, second guessing them or nitpicking on everything. But it's one of the most complicated things we have built next to the serializer in quite a while. It's, so it's. I think we all want to get it right, and there's lots of unknowns, lots of new user experience details that we need to figure out, and I'm pretty sure, like, once we ship preview 4, we will get even more feedback that we haven't even thought about yet. So it's good. I'm actually quite happy where we are.
I mean, it just happens to be the very complicated. We're working on the linking features, so we want to make sure it works with that. This is really our first generator, so we're inventing precedent here instead of depending on it. So, yes, to restate Emo's thing, we're not picking on you. We're making sure that we know what to do for the next generator.
No, for sure. I was more than happy to get all the feedback. Yeah. Thanks for the time as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. And then have a good one.
And as a plan of action, Emo, are you thinking for other blocked features that are trying to get in preview 4 that we hold some one-off meetings, or you got thoughts?
So that was the only one I was aware of. I mean, in general, like, the previews have a fairly low bar in terms of breaking changes right now. The only thing we need to keep in mind is that preview 4 is the quote unquote build, even though build is not an in-person event. Is usually the most hyped version of our stack, so that's usually where you get most of the customer adoption. Meaning, preview 5 and 6, people will not upgrade as much to those as they did to preview 4. So anything that doesn't make it into preview 4, you will just get less feedback on. That's pretty much all it means. It doesn't mean you don't get to ship it, right?
I mean, just for my own benefit, I was talking mostly about the writable DOM.
Yeah, so the writable DOM, I think we should. I mean, is it something that you want to get in by next week?
Yes.
Would it be reasonable if we would do a 1-hour session tomorrow morning?
That would be awesome.
I think the strongly typed iLogger messages is in a similar boat. This is another source generator where it's pretty important for us to get feedback by a large number of people. So if there's a way to promote that one as well, I would.
That's the first one, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, so then I think they were both relatively easy. Can we do them in 1 hour both? Is that reasonable? Or should we book 2 hours and pray for the best?
I mean, I'll just point out again, you thought that this was the first hour of this meeting, so.
I think we have pretty high confidence that the DOM is nearly done with feedback. I suspect.
Let me press the record button so I can play it to you tomorrow morning. But yeah.
We're still streaming.
Oh, good. Everything you said will be used against you.
Okay. So the logging source generator is kind of a new type of source generator. I don't know how much you guys have gone over it so far, but I expect that there'll be some more precedent setting there.
Okay, how about this? I'll book a 2-hour session for tomorrow. Worst case, we finish early, and
that's the best
case we actually get both things done, right?
Okay, but we'll only do these 2 things, and then we'll just give people time back.
Yeah, because I mean that's the 3rd session this week, and then in total it will be 7 hours or something because we already went overtime twice.
Right. I'm just making sure that's what our plan is.
Does that make everybody happy, or anything else?
Sounds good to me, thanks.
Awesome. Then I'll book the meeting for tomorrow morning, probably 10 to 12, because it's the usual slot, and then after that it's weekend time.
Okay. Make sure you're not booking too many solid hours of meetings. In fact, you already don't have 10 to 12 emo.
Yeah, that's also true. Well, I can probably move mine.
I guess I still need to.
A fourth time.
Yeah.
Yay.
Actually, I don't have 10 or 12 or 11 actually. So.
Okay, so when you figure something out.
I have a question. So, I mean, I totally understand if this is not API approved level yet, but was it intentional not to put that label?
I was going to ask Emo, should we label this as anything, or is, because it sort of feels like the answer is, we've talked about some things, it's going to go in preview 4, we know there are going to be changes, it's not the final shape, and this is probably still needs work, but needs work with good enough for prototype, which we don't have a label for.
It's kind of how you want to track this. Like, I mean, I've said before, to me, like, there are cases where we want to track API as approved as a check-in gate. If we want to do this here, I'm also fine with marking this API approved and then file a secondary issue with basically just as a tracking issue of saying, please incorporate feedback or whatever, so we don't forget about it. But it also doesn't seem like people will forget it, so people will kick in our door. So I'm fine either way.
I mean, I kind of think Leomi's check-in into .NET Runtime to implement this closes this issue, and then as we want new things, new changes, either changing what we have or like additional things, that's a new issue with the scenario and
the API. Works for me.
Yeah. Thanks.
What did I remove then? No, I just misclicked the remove. Okay.
Alrighty.
Alright, so it's approved without the nice thing where the MC writes up what your final proposal is, but yeah. I'm lazy today.
That's okay. No, that's all good.
Alright, so I think with that, we're going to wrap. At least I'm going to cut off the stream, and I'm going to drop off the call, and I'll let the rest of these guys do whatever they want. So I'll see you all next time.
Jeremy's gone. Let's approve all the things he doesn't want.
He's not gone yet.